The first sign that something was terribly wrong came on the night of August 30, 1977, when Peggy Hodgson heard the shuffling. She lay in bed in her modest council house at 284 Green Street, Enfield, listening to what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor above her head. But that was impossible. Her 4 children were asleep upstairs, and she knew every creak and groan of this house she'd called home for 13 years. The shuffling stopped. Then it started again. Peggy crept up the narrow staircase, her bare feet silent on the worn carpet. The landing was dark, moonlight filtering weakly through the small window at the end of the hall. She pushed open the door to Janet and Margaret's room. Both girls were fast asleep in their beds. The room was undisturbed. She checked on her sons, Johnny and Billy, in the adjoining room. Also sleeping peacefully. Back in her own bed, Peggy tried to dismiss what she'd heard. Old houses made strange noises. The neighbors upstairs, but wait, she lived in an end of terrace house. There were no neighbors upstairs. The shuffling began again, more insistent this time, accompanied by a rhythmic knocking that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. Knock. 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 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 3 more. Peggy pulled the covers over her head, but the knocking continued through the night, relentless and deliberate, as if something was trying to communicate or get in. She didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume her family for the next 18 months and attract the attention of paranormal investigators, police officers, journalists, and BBC crews from around the world. What happened in that unremarkable council house would become one of the most documented and terrifying cases of supernatural activity in modern history. The next evening, as Peggy prepared dinner, 11-year-old Janet burst into the kitchen, her face pale with terror. "Mom, the chest of drawers, it's moving by itself." Peggy followed her daughter upstairs, expecting to find that Janet had simply bumped into the furniture. Instead, she found 12-year-old Margaret cowering in the corner of their shared bedroom, pointing at the heavy oak chest of drawers that stood against the far wall. As Peggy watched in disbelief, the massive piece of furniture began to slide slowly across the floor toward them, its wooden legs scraping against the floorboards with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. There was no one pushing it. No earthquake. No logical explanation. "Get out!" Peggy screamed, grabbing both daughters and pulling them from the room. The 3 huddled on the landing as the scraping sound continued behind the closed door. Then, silence. When Peggy finally worked up the courage to look inside, the chest of drawers had moved nearly 4 feet from its original position and now blocked the doorway. That night, she called the police. Police Constable Carolyn Heaps arrived at 284 Green Street expecting to deal with a domestic disturbance or perhaps a case of teenage mischief. Instead, she witnessed something that would haunt her for the rest of her career. "I saw a chair slide approximately 3 to 4 feet across the floor," she later wrote in her official report. "There was no one near the chair which could have moved it. I checked the floor to see if it was uneven or if there was anything which could have caused the chair to move, but found nothing." PC Heaps examined the house thoroughly, checking for hidden wires, magnets, or any mechanical device that could explain the movement. She found nothing. More disturbing still, as she conducted her search, she heard the knocking sounds coming from various parts of the house walls, ceilings, even the floor beneath her feet. The knocking was loud and appeared to move around the house, she noted. "I asked the family if they had heard the knocking and they said yes. I then asked if anyone could make the knocking sound, and no one could." When PC Heaps filed her report that night, she had no idea that she was documenting the early stages of what would become one of the most intensive paranormal investigations ever conducted. Word of the Enfield disturbances spread quickly through the local community and eventually reached the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, Britain's premier paranormal investigation organization. Maurice Grossa, a 57-year-old inventor and SPR member, arrived at Green Street on September 5, 1977. Grosso was a skeptic by nature, a man of science who had only recently joined the SPR following the tragic death of his daughter Janet in a motorcycle accident. He had hoped that paranormal research might provide some comfort, some evidence of life after death. Instead, he walked into a situation that challenged everything he believed about the natural world. "I went there to debunk it," Grosso later admitted. "I was certain there had to be a rational explanation." That certainty evaporated within hours of his arrival. On his first night in the house, Grossa witnessed a toy brick fly across Janet's bedroom with no one near it. The brick struck the wall with such force that it left a dent in the plaster. When he examined the trajectory, he found it physically impossible for any of the children to have thrown it without being seen. But it was the voice that truly unnerved him. Late that night, as Grossa sat in the living room interviewing Peggy about the disturbances, a deep, gravelly voice suddenly emanated from upstairs. It was clearly masculine, harsh, and filled with an anger that seemed to permeate the very air. "Get out of my house." The voice didn't come from any of the children's rooms, it seemed to come from the walls themselves. Grossa grabbed his tape recorder and headed upstairs, his hands trembling as he set up his equipment. What he captured over the following months would become some of the most chilling audio evidence of paranormal activity ever recorded. The voice that terrorized the Hodgson family claimed to belong to Bill Wilkins, a previous occupant of 284 Green Street who had died in the house several years earlier. Through Janet, who appeared to be the primary target of the supernatural manifestations, Bill spoke with increasing frequency and growing hostility. "I am Bill Wilkins," the voice would rasp through Janet's small frame. "I lived here. This is my house. I don't want you here." The transformation was physically impossible to witness without feeling a chill of pure terror. One moment Janet would be a normal 11-year-old girl, giggling with her sister or complaining about homework. The next, her face would contort into an expression of adult rage, her voice dropping to that of an elderly man's, gravelly and bitter. Grossa documented everything. He recorded over 200 hours of audio, took hundreds of photographs, and kept meticulous notes of every incident. Other investigators joined him, including Guy Playfair, a writer and SPR member who would spend over a year studying the case. "The voice was the most disturbing aspect," Playfair later wrote. "It wasn't ventriloquism, we checked extensively for that. Janet's lips barely moved, and the voice seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat, as if something else was speaking through her." Medical examinations of Janet during these episodes revealed physical impossibilities. Her vocal cords showed no strain despite producing sounds that should have damaged them. Her larynx remained in its normal position even as the deep male voice poured from her mouth. But Bill Wilkins' voice was only the beginning of the horror. As autumn turned to winter in 1977, the phenomena at Green Street grew more violent and more frequent. Objects didn't just move, they flew with potentially lethal force. Kitchen knives embedded themselves in walls. Heavy furniture overturned without warning. Books burst into flames spontaneously. The children, particularly Janet, began to exhibit signs of physical assault from an invisible attacker. Scratches would appear on their skin as investigators watched. Janet was found hanging by her neck from a makeshift noose in her bedroom, but the positioning made it impossible for her to have created it herself. Most terrifyingly, Janet began to levitate. On December 15, 1977, Grossa was interviewing the family in the living room when they heard Janet scream from upstairs. Rushing to her bedroom, they found her floating horizontally 3 feet above her bed, her body rigid, her eyes rolled back to show only the whites. "I thought she was having a seizure," Margaret later recalled. But she was floating. Actually floating in the air. The levitation lasted nearly 30 seconds before Janet crashed back onto the bed, gasping and disoriented. Similar incidents occurred dozens of times over the following months, witnessed by family members, investigators, journalists, and police officers. Photographer Graham Morris, on assignment for the Daily Mirror, managed to capture one of these levitation episodes on film. The photograph shows Janet suspended in mid-air, her body parallel to the floor, with no visible means of support. "I was watching through the viewfinder when it happened," Morris said. "One second she was on the bed, the next she was flying through the air. I just kept shooting." By early 1978, the Enfield poltergeist had attracted international media attention. Reporters from newspapers and television stations around the world descended on Green Street, turning the quiet residential area into a circus of satellite trucks, camera crews, and curious onlookers. The BBC sent a team to investigate, led by reporter Rosalind Morris. Their equipment malfunctioned repeatedly, cameras stopped working, audio recorders produced only static, and lighting equipment failed without explanation. Despite these technical difficulties, the BBC crew witnessed numerous incidents, including objects moving without human contact and the manifestation of Bill Wilkins' voice. But the media attention seemed to feed the phenomena, making them stronger and more aggressive. Janet began speaking in multiple voices, not just Bill Wilkins, but other entities that claimed to inhabit the house. There was an elderly woman who spoke in whispers, a young child who cried incessantly, and something else, something darker that spoke in languages none of them recognized. The house felt evil, recalled Daily Mirror journalist Douglas Bentsay, who spent several nights at Green Street. There was a presence there, something that wanted to cause harm. You could feel it watching you, waiting. The physical attacks escalated. Janet was thrown from her bed repeatedly, sometimes with such force that she crashed into the opposite wall. Invisible hands left bruises on her arms and throat. On one occasion, investigators watched helplessly as Janet was apparently dragged across the floor by an unseen force, her fingernails leaving scratches in the wooden boards as she fought against her invisible attacker. What made the Enfield case particularly disturbing was how the supernatural activity began to spread beyond the confines of 284 Green Street. Neighbors reported strange occurrences in their own homes, unexplained knocking, objects moving, and sightings of shadowy figures in their gardens. The family next door, the Nottinghams, experienced their own terrifying encounters. Vic Nottingham, a skeptical man who initially dismissed the Hodgsons' claims as attention-seeking, changed his tune when his own house became affected. "I heard footsteps in my loft every night for weeks," Nottingham told investigators. "Heavy footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth. But when I went up there, nothing. The loft was empty." Mrs. Nottingham reported seeing a tall, dark figure standing in their back garden, staring at their house. When she called out to it, the figure simply vanished. Even the investigators weren't safe. Grossa began experiencing phenomena in his own home: telephone calls with no one on the line, objects moving in his study, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Playfair reported similar experiences, including books flying off shelves in his London flat and strange voices on his answering machine. "It was as if the entities from Green Street had attached themselves to us," Grossa later explained. "They followed us home." As winter gave way to spring in 1978, the activity at Green Street reached a new level of intensity. The house itself seemed to be changing, transforming into something malevolent and alive. Temperatures in certain rooms would drop by 20 degrees without explanation. Foul odors, the smell of decay and sulfur, would fill the air for hours at a time. Water would drip from ceilings in rooms with no plumbing above them, and when tested, the water was found to contain no identifiable source. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Investigators detected electromagnetic anomalies throughout the house, areas where their equipment registered impossible readings, as if the very fabric of reality had been torn. Most disturbing of all were the sounds that came from within the walls: scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way out, and whispered conversations in languages that predated English by centuries. Janet's condition deteriorated rapidly during this period. The entity claiming to be Bill Wilkins spoke through her for hours at a time, leaving her exhausted and disoriented. Medical examinations revealed no physical cause for her symptoms, but her health was clearly declining. She was being consumed, Peggy Hodgson later said. Whatever was in that house was feeding off her, growing stronger while she grew weaker. The voice of Bill Wilkins became increasingly articulate and detailed in its communications. It provided specific information about the house's history, the previous occupants, and events that had occurred there decades before the Hodgsons moved in. When investigators checked these details against historical records, they found them to be remarkably accurate. But the entity also made threats: specific, detailed threats against the family's safety. "I will hurt the girl," it promised through Janet's twisted features. "I will make her suffer as I have suffered. This house is mine, and I will have it back." As the situation grew more desperate, Peggy Hodgson turned to the Church of England for help. Reverend Peter Brooks, the local vicar, initially approached the case with healthy skepticism but quickly became convinced of the supernatural nature of the disturbances. "I have seen things in that house that challenge everything I believed about the world," Reverend Brooks confided to investigators. "Evil has taken root there, and I fear for that family's souls." Several attempts at blessing or cleansing the house were made, but they seemed only to anger the entities further. During one particularly violent exorcism attempt, furniture throughout the house began moving simultaneously. Kitchen drawers flew open, spilling their contents across the floor. Windows shattered without explanation. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that investigators could see their breath. Most terrifyingly, Janet levitated during the exorcism, but this time she remained conscious and aware, screaming in terror as an invisible force held her suspended 3 feet above the floor. "Help me!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "It won't let me go. It won't let me go." The exorcism was abandoned when Janet began to choke as if invisible hands were tightening around her throat. As soon as Reverend Brooks stopped the ritual, Janet crashed to the floor, gasping and sobbing. "We made it angry," the Reverend later admitted. "Whatever presence inhabits that house, it doesn't want to leave. It considers the family its prisoners." Determined to find a rational explanation for the phenomena, several scientists and researchers conducted extensive investigations at Green Street. Dr. David Fontana from Cardiff University brought sophisticated equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, and seismic activity. What they discovered defied scientific explanation. Electromagnetic readings throughout the house showed impossible spikes and patterns that couldn't be replicated in laboratory conditions. Temperature drops occurred in isolated pockets of air, with no identifiable source. Most puzzling of all, their seismic equipment registered vibrations consistent with heavy footsteps in rooms where no one was present. "The readings we obtained at Green Street violate several fundamental laws of physics," Dr. Fontana later wrote in his report. "Either our understanding of the universe is fundamentally flawed, or we are dealing with forces that exist outside the parameters of known science." Sleep studies conducted on Janet revealed additional anomalies. During episodes where the Bill Wilkins voice manifested, her brainwave patterns showed characteristics of both deep sleep and high alertness, simultaneously a neurological impossibility. Thermal imaging cameras captured temperature variations in the shape of human figures moving through the house, despite no visible presence. Audio analysis of the recorded voices revealed acoustic properties that couldn't be produced by human vocal cords. Every attempt to debunk the phenomena only served to confirm their supernatural nature. By the summer of 1979, after nearly 2 years of relentless supernatural activity, the phenomena at Green Street reached their most terrifying crescendo. Janet began manifesting not just Bill Wilkins' voice, but his physical characteristics as well. Her face would contort into the features of an elderly man, her small frame somehow accommodating the posture and movements of someone much larger and older. Medical examinations during these episodes revealed that her bone density actually increased, as if her skeleton was temporarily transforming. The other entities in the house became more aggressive, competing for control of Janet's body. Investigators watched in horror as different personalities fought for dominance, Janet's voice shifting rapidly between the gravelly tones of Bill Wilkins, the whispered pleas of the elderly woman, and her own terrified screams. Objects throughout the house began moving with lethal intent. Kitchen knives flew through the air with precision, embedding themselves inches from family members. Heavy furniture overturned and crashed, narrowly missing the children. Glass objects shattered spontaneously, sending razor-sharp fragments flying. The house itself seemed to be trying to kill its occupants. On one particularly violent night in August 1979, investigators watched as every piece of furniture in the living room moved simultaneously, creating a chaotic whirlwind of flying objects. The wallpaper began peeling off the walls in long strips, revealing strange symbols scratched into the plaster beneath, symbols that appeared to be much older than the house itself. Janet levitated for over 5 minutes during this incident, spinning slowly in the air while multiple voices spoke through her in overlapping cacophony. The temperature in the room dropped to near freezing, and several investigators reported feeling invisible hands grabbing at them. "It was like being inside a tornado of pure malevolence," Grossa later described. "The house was alive, and it was trying to destroy everyone in it." As investigators delved deeper into the history of 284 Green Street, they uncovered disturbing facts about the property and its previous occupants. Bill Wilkins had indeed died in the house, but the circumstances of his death were more mysterious than initially revealed. Medical records showed that he had suffered from severe mental illness in his final years, convinced that something evil lived in the walls of his home. He had died alone, found days later in the same chair where Janet often reported seeing his apparition. But Bill Wilkins wasn't the only previous occupant to die under strange circumstances. Research revealed a pattern of premature deaths, suicides, and unexplained disappearances among the house's residents dating back to its construction in the 1920s. The land itself held dark secrets. Historical records indicated that a medieval execution ground had once stood on the site, where accused witches and heretics were burned at the stake. Some investigators theorized that the supernatural activity was connected to this violent history, that the suffering of those who died there had somehow imprinted itself on the location. Archaeological surveys of the property revealed additional mysteries. Ground-penetrating radar detected what appeared to be underground chambers beneath the house, chambers that didn't appear on any building plans and couldn't be accessed through conventional means. When investigators attempted to excavate these chambers, their equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. Drill bits broke without explanation. Electronic devices failed. Workers reported feeling overwhelmed by sensations of dread and nausea. Whatever lay beneath 284 Green Street wanted to remain hidden. Throughout the ordeal, the Hodgson children displayed remarkable consistency in their accounts of the supernatural activity. Despite extensive questioning by skeptical journalists, police officers, and investigators, their stories never wavered or contradicted each other. Margaret, the eldest at 12, described seeing shadowy figures moving through the house at night. They looked like people, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, and their faces were all dark. They would stand at the foot of my bed and just stare at me. Johnny, the youngest at 10, reported feeling invisible hands touching him while he tried to sleep. Cold hands, he said. They would stroke my hair or touch my face. Sometimes they would pull my blanket off the bed. Billy, 11, described hearing conversations in empty rooms. Adult voices, talking about things I didn't understand. They sounded angry, like they were arguing about something important. But it was Janet who bore the brunt of the supernatural assault. Her descriptions of her experiences were both heartbreaking and terrifying. "It feels like something crawling inside my skin," she told investigators during one of her lucid moments. "Like it's trying to push me out and take over my body. I can feel it moving around inside me, touching parts of me that shouldn't be touched." Medical examinations could find no physical cause for these sensations, but Janet's descriptions were consistently similar to those reported by possession victims throughout history. Most disturbing were Janet's accounts of being somewhere else during the possession episodes. "I'm in a dark place," she said. "It's cold and empty, and there are other people there. They're all scared, and they're all trying to get out. But something won't let them leave." As news of the Enfield poltergeist spread throughout the paranormal community, investigators from around the world arrived at Green Street. The small council house became the site of the most intensive supernatural investigation in history. Dr. Hans Holzer, America's most famous ghost hunter, flew in from New York. Anne-Marie Schaberl, a German medium, spent weeks at the house attempting to communicate with the entities. Ed and Lorraine Warren, the renowned demonologists, conducted their own investigation and concluded that the house was indeed haunted by multiple entities. Each investigator brought their own equipment and methodology, but all reached the same conclusion: 284 Green Street was the site of genuine supernatural activity that defied rational explanation. The sheer number of witnesses made hoax theories impossible to maintain. Over 200 people had witnessed unexplainable phenomena at the house, including police officers, journalists, clergy, scientists, and medical professionals. The consistency of their accounts, despite coming from individuals with no connection to each other, created an overwhelming body of evidence. Time-lapse photography captured furniture moving without human contact. Audio recordings documented voices speaking in empty rooms. Temperature readings showed impossible fluctuations. Electromagnetic measurements detected energy patterns that violated known laws of physics. Yet the most compelling evidence remained the transformation of Janet Hodgson herself. As the investigation entered its second year, Janet's possession episodes became more frequent and more violent. The entity claiming to be Bill Wilkins spoke through her for hours at a time, engaging in complex conversations with investigators and demonstrating knowledge that an 11-year-old girl couldn't possibly possess. During these episodes, Janet's personality completely disappeared, replaced by that of an angry, bitter old man. Medical monitoring during the possessions revealed physiological changes that should have been impossible. Her blood pressure and heart rate matched those of an elderly male, and her brain activity showed patterns inconsistent with a child her age. The entity spoke of its death in detail, describing the experience of dying in the house and being trapped there ever since. It expressed rage at the Hodgson family for invading its territory and threatened increasingly violent retribution. "I will not rest until they are gone," it promised through Janet's distorted features. "This is my house, my prison, and they will suffer as I have suffered." Between possession episodes, Janet was a traumatized shadow of her former self. She lost weight rapidly, developed chronic insomnia, and exhibited signs of severe psychological trauma. Child psychologists who examined her found evidence of genuine terror and confusion, but no indication that she was fabricating her experiences. Janet is a victim, concluded Dr. Margaret Harrison, a child psychiatrist who worked with the family. Whatever is happening to her is beyond her control and is causing genuine psychological damage. As investigators intensified their efforts to understand and document the phenomena, the entities in the house began targeting them directly. Equipment malfunctioned with increasing frequency. Investigators reported being physically attacked by invisible forces. Several researchers abandoned the case after experiencing what they described as psychic assault. Maurice Grosso himself became a primary target. The entity claiming to be Bill Wilkins expressed particular hatred for him, threatening him by name and attempting to cause him physical harm. During one investigation session, Grosso was lifted off the floor by an invisible force and slammed against the wall with enough force to crack his ribs. "It knows I'm trying to understand it," Grosso explained. "And it doesn't want to be understood. It wants to remain hidden, to continue its torment without interference." Photographs taken in the house began showing anomalous shadow figures that weren't visible to the naked eye, orbs of light that moved with apparent intelligence, and distortions in the images that suggested the presence of some form of energy. Most unsettling were the photographs of Janet during possession episodes. The images showed her face transformed into something barely recognizable as human features contorted with age and malevolence that couldn't be achieved through normal expression or makeup. The breakthrough in understanding the Enfield case came through an unexpected source: historical research conducted by local librarian Joanna Fletcher. While investigating the property records for Green Street, Fletcher discovered a series of documents that had been misfiled for decades. These documents revealed that the land beneath 284 Green Street had been the site of significant trauma throughout history. During the medieval period, it had served as an execution ground for accused witches and heretics. In the 18th century, a workhouse had stood on the site, where dozens of paupers had died under horrific conditions. Most significant was the discovery of a Victorian-era report describing supernatural disturbances at a previous building on the same location. The report, filed by a local magistrate in 1888, described phenomena virtually identical to those experienced by the Hodgson family: moving furniture, disembodied voices, and the possession of young girls. "It's as if the land itself is cursed," Fletcher concluded. "Generations of suffering and death have left some kind of psychic imprint that manifests through whoever is most vulnerable in each household." This theory explained why children, particularly young girls, seem to be the primary targets of the supernatural activity. Their psychological vulnerability made them ideal conduits for the trapped entities seeking a way to interact with the physical world. By the winter of 1979, the situation at Green Street had reached a breaking point. Janet's health was deteriorating rapidly, and the supernatural activity had become so violent that investigators feared for the family's safety. The entity claiming to be Bill Wilkins had been joined by others, angry spirits that seemed drawn to the house by the ongoing paranormal activity. These entities competed for control of Janet's body, creating a cacophony of voices and personalities that left the young girl exhausted and confused. During the final major manifestation on December 20, 1979, investigators witnessed phenomena that challenged their understanding of reality itself. Every object in the house moved simultaneously, creating a maelstrom of flying furniture and debris. The walls themselves seemed to pulse and breathe like living tissue. The temperature fluctuated wildly, from freezing cold to stifling heat within seconds. Janet levitated for over 20 minutes during this episode, her body contorting into impossible positions while multiple entities spoke through her in overlapping voices. The cacophony was so overwhelming that several investigators fled the house, unable to bear the psychological assault. At the climax of the manifestation, something extraordinary happened. Janet's own voice broke through the supernatural din, clear and strong despite her physical exhaustion. "No!" she screamed. "This is my body. You can't have it. I won't let you." The house fell silent instantly. Janet crashed to the floor, unconscious but breathing. When she awoke hours later, she was herself again, weak and traumatized, but free from possession. The entities never spoke through her again. The supernatural activity at 284 Green Street gradually diminished throughout 1980, though it never completely ceased. The Hodgson family remained in the house for several more years, experiencing occasional minor incidents but nothing approaching the intensity of the 1977 to 1979 period. Maurice Grosso continued his investigation until 1982, compiling over 1,500 pages of documentation and hundreds of hours of audio and video evidence. His final report concluded that the Enfield poltergeist case represented genuine supernatural phenomena that couldn't be explained by conventional science. "I went to Green Street as a skeptic," Grosser wrote in his final report. "I leave as a man who has witnessed proof that consciousness survives death, that the human spirit can become trapped between worlds, and that under certain circumstances, the dead can interact with the living in ways that defy our understanding of reality." Janet Hodgson, now an adult, rarely speaks publicly about her experiences. In interviews, she maintains that the events were real and that she was genuinely possessed by entities beyond her control. The psychological trauma of those 2 years has remained with her throughout her life, but she credits her own strength and the support of her family with helping her survive the ordeal. "People can believe what they want," she has said. "I know what happened to me. I know what I experienced. And I know that there are things in this world that science can't explain." The house at 284 Green Street still stands today, though it has changed hands several times since the Hodgson family moved out. Subsequent occupants have reported minor supernatural incidents, unexplained noises, objects moving, the occasional glimpse of shadowy figures, but nothing approaching the intensity experienced during the late 1970s. Perhaps the entities have found peace. Perhaps they have moved on to whatever lies beyond death. Or perhaps they simply wait, patient and eternal, for the right circumstances to manifest again. The truth about what happened at Green Street may never be fully understood. But the testimony of over 200 witnesses, the thousands of pages of documentation, and the hundreds of hours of recorded evidence stand as a testament to one undeniable fact: something extraordinary occurred in that modest council house in North London. Something that challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of reality itself. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, the voice of Bill Wilkins may still be whispering, "This is my house. And I will never leave." The Enfield poltergeist case remains one of the most documented supernatural investigations in history. The evidence collected by Maurice Grosser, Guy Playfair, and dozens of other investigators is housed in the archives of the Society for Psychical Research in London, available to researchers and skeptics alike. Whether one believes in the supernatural or not, the Enfield case presents a compelling body of evidence that cannot be easily dismissed or explained away. The house at 284 Green Street continues to intrigue paranormal researchers and the curious public. It stands as a reminder that in our modern, rational world, there remain mysteries that defy explanation, shadows at the edge of understanding that suggest reality may be far stranger and more complex than we dare imagine. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.